Let's bring in Zeke Miller and Sabrina Siddiqui in our Washington bureau. Zeke is a CBSN political contributor and White House correspondent for Time, and Sabrina is a political reporter for The Guardian. All right, so much to talk about. Let's start with this tax plan. President Trump has faced criticism for not being sufficiently conservative, but this plan seems like something any of his primary campaign rivals could have put out. What do you think about that, Zeke?
You know, it does sort of hew to sort of the traditional Republican sort of tax cut proposals, but not every Republican candidate. And obviously, the Republican Party is a big tent right now. Certainly, what we know about this plan right now, and this largely is a rehash of what we heard from the Trump campaign back in August and September of last year. We know the tax cut side, we don't really know how they're going to pay for it beyond some vague comments on deductions and repatriation. A lot of Republicans, you know, we've heard them for the last 7 or 8 years. They were budget hawks. We haven't really heard from Donald Trump how to pay for that. And I think we're going to start hearing from some Republicans in the next couple of days. They like the idea of tax cuts. They're very concerned about how to pay for that without ballooning the deficit.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think, Sabrina? There seemed to be a paucity of detail.
I think Zeke is absolutely right. Most of the Republicans I spoke with today on Capitol Hill had one question that was predominantly part of the reaction to the tax plan, which is how do you pay for it? And currently it's difficult for tax experts to even analyze the plan because it's not really any detailed policy. It's a one-page bullet list of, yes, a lot of items that have been on a Republican wish list for tax reform for decades, but without getting into the specifics of how you enact that as an actual substantive policy. And one of the biggest moves, of course, is to slash the corporate tax rate down to 15%. That would be dramatic from its current rate of 35%. And then they want to consolidate 7 tax brackets into 3 individual tax brackets, but are not really offering even details on what the income thresholds would be. So there are a lot of unanswered questions. And I think even Republicans privately viewed this less about a meaningful offer on policy and more to do with the president wanting to showcase something as he marks his first 100 days in office, of course, being very mindful of the media narrative that he doesn't really have any legislative accomplishments that he can hold up and point to.
What about health care reform, Sabrina? What would have to happen on Thursday and Friday for there to be any chance of the House considering health care this week?
Well, today certainly marked a significant step if you look at where Republicans were prior to the 2-week Easter recess, where the House Freedom Caucus, so that group of the hard-right conservatives in the chamber, through their support behind the health care plan, if it includes an amendment that was brokered by one of the moderate Republicans and the chairman, Mark Meadows of the Freedom Caucus. And that amendment actually, though, having said that, could pose problems for other moderates who feel like it might go too far. What it essentially does, it allows states to opt out of Obamacare's essential health benefits. That's coverage for maternity care, mental health, prescription drugs, and it also threatens to weaken coverage of pre-existing conditions, enables insurers to potentially raise the costs on individuals who not only have pre-existing conditions, but who are also older in age. So I think that you're still going to see that same dynamic. Can you get conservatives and moderates behind the same piece of legislation and get to the 216 votes that they would need to pass the House? And I don't think they really have that answer yet.
Yeah, I mean, Zeke, what about that? Isn't it just the same dynamic that basically torpedoed the first attempt at this?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a big element there. I mean, when you look to the Senate, things get even dicier. And one of the things I've heard, you know, not so much from people in the White House, but people on the outside, is that, you know, when Donald Trump took office in January, Republicans had both chambers of Congress. So there was a lot of momentum, and that's one of the reasons why they brought health care up first. It was so complicated. The idea was sort of get this perfect sort of, you know, bank shot. They were to knock off health care. That would give them the revenue baseline, the technical term that will allow them to do tax reform under reconciliation. And then from there, they're going to go do infrastructure. And they sort of, each of them is sort of a pyramid. They had to do the foundation of health care to get to everything else. That seems to be, they're throwing that one out the window, at least for now. Sort of, they do need to get health care done to accomplish anything along the lines of what the president released today on tax reform. But again, with the Senate, I mean, every day that goes by, maybe they'll get this thing out of the House in the next couple of days. But the prospects in the Senate are even more complex now than they were just a few weeks ago. And this thing goes into the summer. At a certain point, the midterm fever starts to kick in early.
All right, well, let's talk about this road trip, a short one for the senators Wednesday to the White House for a briefing on North Korea. They say they left the meeting with few details about the administration's strategy on North Korea. Zeke, what do you think the White House wanted from this meeting?
The White House is quick to point out that senators requested this, the president's suggestion to, come do it here and have my people do it here. The president, again, as Sabrina pointed out, is mindful of the optics, and this sort of sent a powerful signal that the president was trying to send around the world. At the same time this was going on, a senior administration official was briefing reporters and said that military preparations for North Korea were underway. But wouldn't also specify what that means beyond. Does it go into current deployments or something else that hasn't been announced just yet? This is certainly an effort by the administration to ratchet up the pressure on North Korea to signal that they are serious about this issue. Of course, the last thing they're going to do is tell a bunch of members of Congress exactly what they're planning to do, because then they would go around and tell it to us. The president likes to say he wants to keep people in the dark about some of these things, and he's been carrying through on that so far through his the early days of his administration. So I think if senators were expecting to hear a lot of sort of this is what we're going to do, they probably had their expectations set wrong. But what they did hear, according to sources in the room and the administration, was that they were briefed on sort of the real intelligence about how critical this threat has become. And that was, I think why you saw some of these statements, the need to act, so the statements of support for the administration on this, and that's what the White House was looking to achieve.
Interesting. All right, on another topic here, the president told the Washington Examiner he's absolutely considering breaking up the Ninth Circuit of Appeals, which halted his executive action on immigration earlier this year. The White House also attacked another judge this week who blocked its plan to punish sanctuary cities. What is the White House, Sabrina, you think, trying to get from these attacks on the judiciary?
Well, I think that we know President Trump has had more of an adversarial view when it comes to the judicial branch of government, in part because you have seen at least two of his initial executive orders blocked from being implemented. But it's important to note that it's not the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals that was behind both of these rulings entirely. In fact, the travel ban was initially blocked by a district court, and then yes, it was the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals that upheld that ruling. And then yesterday's ruling, where they blocked Trump's order to bar funding from so-called sanctuary cities, that also came actually from a district judge. So again, not the court that he's going after, but I think that this is an opportunity for the White House because the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals covers 9 Western states and some U.S. territories. 25 of its judges, of the 25 of its judges, 18 were appointed by Democratic presidents. So there are Republicans who want to break up this court into separate regions so that they can create a second court and then not have such a liberal slant in their view. And maybe this is a way to kind of test and see if there's support and opportunity from some Republicans in Congress who might join the administration in trying to move forth. But again, I think it has more to do with the president taking very personally the rulings that have come down against 2 of his signature goals.
Well, Zeke, so I'm wondering then, at what point does it sort of come back to the authors of those executive orders that are under these legal challenges, in that there's a consequence to this? Or is this the kind of situation where the president says, well, this is not the fault of the order or the person behind the order, the author of it. Instead, this is really just a consequence of the liberal court members here deciding something because of their political bias?
Yeah, I mean, there's a distinction, I think, between what the president thinks and what the people around him think. When it came to the first travel order, a lot of the people around the administration said this was crafted, too broadly. We certainly heard that from a lot of members of Congress. They came around back the second time, were a little bit more thoughtful and more narrow. It was a more narrowly tailored executive order. It's funny, I was with an administration official not long ago, and the president still calls that second one a watered-down version. Doesn't believe they ever should have issued it. He believes they should have stuck with the first one. But I think it's important to remember, the White House is using the phrases like circuit shopping or forum shopping now with courts. I mean, that's undoubtedly happened in the past. I mean, you look at, the federal courts in Texas during the Obama years sort of being a hotbed of similar temporary restraining orders, including one that that blocked one of President Barack Obama's signature efforts on immigration reform in his second term to act unilaterally after Congress. So there are parallels there where governing by executive order is very hard because you live by the pen, die by the pen, but also by federal courts that can undo things. It's a lot easier to work through Congress and make a lasting impact. Sorry, it's easier to make a lasting impact through Congress, but it's difficult to work with Congress.
Finally, our CBS News poll finds more Americans will blame President Trump and Republicans if the government shuts down. Sabrina, what do you think that figure means to Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi?
Well, look, I think that Democrats are pretty pleased with the state of negotiations today because they were able to have the White House back off of a threat to suspend payments for Obamacare subsidies. And they also, of course, were able to get the White House and Republicans seemingly to back off of the president's insistence that this spending package to keep the government open include funding for the construction of the border wall. Both of those were non-starters for Democrats. And I think they are mindful that at the end of the day, it's often on the president when there's a major shutdown or dispute in Congress, especially if the government is going to shut down, over what a lot of Americans, I don't think, view as a priority at this moment. Again, and if you even look back to the president's promise to build a border wall, he said Mexico was going to pay for it. Certainly, Congress was not expecting to have to appropriate those funds. So this was a fight that he was never going to win. I think what we're probably going to see at this point, having said that, because negotiations are still fluid, is a temporary measure of some kind, maybe even a 1-week spending bill just to kick the can down the road. That's what I heard from one Republican aide. They believe there's a lot going on, and maybe lawmakers need a little bit of breathing room first before they resolve how to proceed for the broader fiscal year.
Zeke, what are you hearing?
Similar along the lines of what Sabrina was saying, one of the things that we'll hear from the White House if the outlines of this deal regarding no money for the wall being there, it means that you won't look through that continuing resolution and see a line item for the wall. But the White House is going to spin that certainly into the weekend as this deal gets ironed out and into next week once it's done, is that they did get money for border security, and they're hoping that they'll be able to go around to the American people and say, well, we know there's no money for the wall, but we'll upgrade and maintain existing fencing, continue planning, and maybe shift some money around within the sort of the broader Department of Homeland Security budget to give them something that they can call a win and then gear up for the fight in fiscal year 2018. But if they're having a lot of trouble right now in fiscal 17, this is also a bit of a warning on the next year's budget. That's 6 months away. That's not when it comes to budgets, that's actually not that long a time. So they need to start working on that one too.
All right, a lot to watch. Zeke Miller and Sabrina Siddiqui in Washington. Thanks to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.